I knew something was wrong the moment I saw fresh tire tracks in my gravel driveway. It was early Saturday morning, and I was planning to clean out the old hay bales in my barn. As I walked closer, I noticed something that made my blood boil. My barn doors were wide open, and inside was a silver Lexus SUV that definitely wasn't mine. Before you watch full story, comment down your country name, I would love to hear. I've lived on this 10-acre property for 2 years now. I moved here specifically to escape city life and those annoying HOAs with their endless rules. My name's Kellen Ashford, and though I'm not part of Sycamore Glade, that fancy neighborhood next door, they seem to think they own everything around here. I walked into the barn, and there she was, Beverly Alston, the HOA vice president, sitting in her car like she owned the place, scrolling through her phone. I knocked on her window. She rolled it down with that fake smile of hers. "Oh, I just needed a shaded place to park while we do the HOA trail cleanup," she said casually. "It's not a big deal." "You're on my property," I said flatly. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she waved me off. "You left the doors open." "No, I didn't." She ignored that. "Besides, I'm technically the HOA access liaison for this area. We're managing the shared boundary zones." "There's no such thing," I said, already pulling the barn doors shut behind me. I slipped the bolt into place and locked the padlock. Her reaction was instant. "You can't do that. Open the doors." I leaned against the wooden frame. "Call the sheriff if you've got a problem." She did exactly that. 20 minutes later, a county sheriff rolled up to my property. I stayed calm, arms crossed, while Beverly wailed from inside the barn like she was being held hostage. Deputy Harlan stepped out of his cruiser, looked at me, then at the locked barn. "Morning, Kellen," he sighed. "You got a hostage in there or what?" "Nope," I said. "Just a trespasser." She let herself in. Harlan walked over, knocked on the barn door, and told Beverly to unlock her car and step out. She did, flustered and fuming. "He locked me in," she shouted. "He can't do that. I'm the HOA vice president." Harlan looked her up and down. "Ma'am, this isn't HOA property. This is private land. Did you have permission to be here?" He left the doors open. "That's not permission," Harlan said. Beverly's face turned redder than a brick wall. "I'm filing a complaint." "You're going in the cruiser?" Harlan replied. "Trespassing on private property. You can explain it to the judge." And just like that, Beverly Alston, HOA tyrant of Sycamore Glade, was arrested in my driveway, and I hadn't even had my coffee yet. The following Tuesday, I was elbow deep in a busted carburetor when a certified letter arrived. The envelope had the Sycamore Glade HOA logo embossed across the top, 3 pine trees and a fake little gazebo. I tossed it on my workbench and didn't open it until after lunch, figuring it was an apology or at least an attempt at damage control. I was wrong. Inside was a formal notice of encroachment, claiming my barn extended 12 feet onto what they now referred to as HOA-managed buffer land. There was even a hand-drawn map clearly traced from an outdated survey, showing a fake boundary line that cut right through the middle of my hay field. I stared at the paper for a long moment, then read it again. It was signed by none other than Beverly's husband, Keith Alston, the HOA president. So that's how they were playing it. I drove straight to the county recorder's office and requested the most recent plat maps. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with a bun and a coffee mug that said, "I file papers not feelings," handed me a manila folder after about 20 minutes of searching. "Your property ends where it always has," she said. "No changes filed, no easements granted. You're clean." I thanked her and made copies. On my way out, I noticed a flyer pinned to the public notice board. Sycamore Glade HOA was hosting a community oversight town hall that Thursday evening. Open to the public. I circled the date on my calendar. When Thursday rolled around, I dug out my old contractor's briefcase. Inside were blueprints, title documents, and the original property boundaries from when I bought the land. I added the new maps from the recorder's office and stapled them all together. Then I drove over to the meeting. The town hall was being held in the community clubhouse, a sterile-looking building with too much fake stone and not enough insulation. Inside, about 30 residents sat in folding chairs facing a long table where the HOA board sat like some kind of tribunal. Keith sat in the center, Beverly next to him, arms crossed like she was bracing for a hurricane. They didn't notice me until Keith banged a gavel and called the meeting to order. "We'll begin tonight with some updates on community border management," he said, adjusting his glasses. "There's been confusion regarding the perimeter along the southern trail. We've discovered an unauthorized structure partially intruding into HOA buffer space." A few heads turned. I made my way to the front. "You mean my barn?" I said, loud enough to cut through the murmurs. Keith's jaw tightened. You're not a member of this community, sir? Correct. Which is why your claim is garbage. I set my briefcase down on the table and opened it. These are official records from the county. Your map is a joke. Your letter is fabricated. You're attempting a land grab. Beverly leaned forward. We're protecting our residents from visual and structural pollution visible from shared spaces. I'm protecting myself from your fantasy maps, I countered. And by the way, your little stunt last week, that's on file too. Sheriff's report and all. Someone in the audience raised their hand. An older man in a golf windbreaker. Wait, are you the guy she got arrested for sitting in his barn? Yep, I said, turning to face the crowd. She parked her car inside my private barn without permission. I shut the door to keep my livestock from wandering in. She called the sheriff. He arrested her for trespassing. End of story. More murmurs. Keith tried to regain control. This is not a forum for. I held up a document. This is a formal petition to file a cease and desist order against the HOA for harassment, false claims, and attempted interference with private property. I've contacted a land use attorney. If this continues, I'll initiate proceedings. That caught their attention. Until now, they bullied retirees and young families into submission with ambiguous rules and threats of fines. But I had something they didn't expect: documentation and no fear of confrontation. A blonde woman with a toddler on her hip stood up near the back. Wait. They told me I had to pay a fence violation fine because my dog barked at someone on the trail. They said my fence was provoking aggression. The man in the windbreaker shook his head. They fined me for using the wrong shade of mulch. My wife cried over that one. Another woman stood up. They cited me for having a kayak visible from the street. I live on the lake. Where else am I supposed to put it? The room began to shift. What started as a quiet meeting was turning into a powder keg. Keith banged the gavel again. This is not relevant to tonight's agenda. I raised my voice. It's exactly relevant. This isn't about rules. It's about control. They're inventing authority that doesn't exist. If they're willing to falsify a property map to grab land, what else are they willing to do? Keith stood abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. No, said a voice from the door. Deputy Harlan stepped into the room, badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. This meeting's just getting interesting. Beverly's face went pale. Harlan walked to the front and pulled a folded document from his chest pocket. We got a call from the county assessor's office after someone tried to file a revised boundary claim without proper documentation. That someone was you, Mr. Alalston? Keith's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Filing false land documents is a crime, Harlan continued. We're opening an investigation. Until that's resolved, you're not to contact Mr. Ashford, file claims against his property, or send any correspondence from the HOA. Do I make myself clear? Keith sat down slowly. Beverly looked like she wanted to vanish into the floor. After the meeting, 3 families approached me in the parking lot. One of them, a quiet man with grease-stained hands and a Ford cap, said, I work concrete. You let me know if you ever need a new driveway poured on the house. Another woman handed me a flash drive. Security footage from my backyard shows Beverly walking toward your barn the morning she got arrested. Thought you might want a time-stamped copy. I took it, nodding once. Appreciated. The tide had turned. The HOA had made a mistake. They thought I was just another quiet property owner they could intimidate. They forgot some of us still know how to read legal documents, draw a hard line, and stand our ground without folding. They tried to make an example out of me. Instead, I became the reason their boardroom lost its grip. The following week brought a strange hush over Sycamore Glade. It was like someone had unplugged the loudspeaker that usually piped arrogance into the neighborhood. No newsletters, no violation slips, no clipboard patrols. For the first time in a while, nobody from the HOA showed up near my south fence line, but I knew better than to think they'd given up. On Wednesday morning, I drove into town to deliver some handmade steel brackets to a client. When I got back, something felt off. My gate, normally chained and padlocked, was closed but not secured. The lock was hanging open, still hooked through the chain but unclicked. I checked the barn. Nothing was missing, but someone had rifled through the storage bins near the back wall. My welding torch had been dragged out and left sitting on the workbench. A roll of fencing wire was unspooled across the floor like someone had yanked it in a hurry and dropped it. I checked the feed room. My ledger book where I recorded deliveries and supply expenses was gone. I installed 2 trail cameras that night, one pointed at the gate, the other tucked behind a hay bale inside the barn. By Friday I had footage. At 2:30 in the morning, a pair of flashlights bobbed down my gravel drive. The video was grainy but clear enough to make out the figures. One was tall and thin, wearing a reflective vest. The other shorter, with a familiar stiff gait and a cropped haircut that didn't belong on any farmhand. Keith and Beverly. They circled the barn like raccoons, scanning the walls. Keith jimmied the padlock with a flat bar while Beverly stood lookout. Once inside, they rummaged around for nearly 20 minutes. Keith took photos of my equipment. Beverly flipped through a binder on the workbench, then snapped something out of it and pocketed it. They left the gate unlatched when they left. I knew exactly what they were doing. If they couldn't win with fake boundary lines, they'd try to invent a safety violation, leak something to the fire marshal, claim hazardous storage, maybe even trigger a forced inspection to shut me down. They weren't just crossing a line anymore. They were playing with felonies. I burned copies of the footage and brought them straight to Deputy Harland. He watched the video twice before speaking. They broke and entered, he said, and they took something. That's burglary. He placed the DVD into an evidence envelope and slid it into a drawer behind his desk. Then he picked up the phone and called the county prosecutor's office. By Monday morning, arrest warrants were issued for both of them. The fallout came fast. Beverly was picked up while walking her dog along the trail behind Sycamore Glades Communal Pond. Keith was arrested at his office. He worked as a claims adjuster for a mid-sized insurance firm across town. Their mug shots hit the local news that evening, tucked between a high school football update and a missing cat story. But it was enough. Residents started talking. A father of 3 posted on a local forum about how the HOA tried to fine him for excessive trampoline noise, despite his backyard being fully fenced and surrounded by hedges. A retired nurse said she was threatened with legal action for keeping a decorative windmill in her flower bed. A former board member from years ago came forward anonymously, claiming they'd resigned after noticing financial discrepancies in how annual dues were being logged. The next day, I received a letter from a woman named Dana Maroro. She lived 3 streets deep into Sycamore Glade and had been quietly tracking HOA spending for over a year. Her brother was a forensic accountant, and together they'd compiled a spreadsheet showing thousands of dollars in maintenance fees that didn't align with any actual vendor work. Entire line items were marked as trail preservation expenses, but no one could ever recall seeing the trails maintained. Some of the invoices were issued to a now-defunct LLC registered under the name Alalston Property Services. Dana asked if I'd be willing to go with her to the county auditor's office. She figured my history with the board might give the report some weight. We met the next morning and walked in together. The auditor's assistant took one look at the folder Dana handed over and called in her supervisor. Within an hour, the office had opened a formal inquiry into the HOA's financial practices. Back in Sycamore Glade, things were unraveling. An emergency meeting was called, but only 2 board members showed up, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Without Keith or Beverly to block the vote, the leadership structure collapsed. Residents demanded answers. By the time their trial date was set, over 40 residents had signed a petition to dissolve the current HOA board entirely. Another 20 volunteered to form an interim committee, one that would operate under strict transparency guidelines, with all budgets and enforcement actions subject to public review. Dana was named interim treasurer. I declined the offer to join the committee. I told them I'd done my part. But I did attend the first official meeting under the new leadership just to watch. They opened with a statement acknowledging past abuses and pledged to never again let a board operate without oversight. Afterward, a woman from the committee walked over and handed me a small wooden plaque. It was made from reclaimed cedar, carved by one of the residents. It read Property Rights Defender, in honor of standing the line. I didn't say much, just nodded. That night, I drove home, made a fresh pot of coffee and stood out by the barn. The stars were out, quiet, no flashlights, no phantom claims, no SUVs parked where they didn't belong. For the first time in months, the barn just looked like a barn again, and that was more than enough. A month later, the final verdict came in. Keith and Beverly pled no contest to multiple charges, including public fraud and tampering with evidence. The judge handed down a sentence of 18 months probation, 500 hours of community service, and a permanent ban from serving on any homeowner association board in the state. They were also ordered to repay over $40,000 in restitution to Sycamore Glades' former residents. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to. The barn was still standing. The gate still held. And the people who once feared clipboards and citations were now sharing potluck recipes over rows of squash and basil. One late afternoon, I walked the south fence line and spotted a freshly painted sign posted just past the old trailhead. It wasn't official, just a plank of cedar with hand-lettered paint. It read, "No trespassing, no fines, no nonsense." Below it, someone had added, "Welcome to the neighborhood." I tipped my hat and kept walking.